A rich man throws his daughter into a boiling cauldron, but the horse saw everything and does this. Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The relentless August sun beat down on the red dirt of Harmony Creek, Oklahoma, when Isadora's world shattered forever. The 4-year-old girl was playing alone in the barn, her curious little eyes following the drips of yellow paint slowly oozing from her small brush. Her rag doll, her only true companion, lay beside her as she tried to color a drawing she'd made on the rough wooden wall. Frank Menden, 52, was known throughout the county as a successful businessman, owner of vast lands where he grew corn and raised cattle. His grain processing company was one of the most important in town, but behind the respectable facade hid an explosive temper that few dared to challenge. That afternoon, when he returned from the fields, sweaty and irritated by problems with suppliers, he found the documents on his desk scattered on the floor, stained with bright yellow paint. The rage that gripped Frank at that moment was like a flash flood. His dark eyes locked on Isadora, who continued playing innocently, oblivious to the chaos she had caused. The wet papers contained important contracts that needed to be signed. That same afternoon, deals that represented thousands of dollars in lost profits. "Isadora!" The shout echoed through the barn like thunder, causing the girl to cower against the wall. Her little hands dropped the brush, which rolled across the cement floor, leaving a golden trail. "What did you do, you little brat?" The child tried to hide behind the rag doll, her lips trembling as she tried to form words that wouldn't come out. Frank approached with heavy steps, his shadow completely covering his daughter's frail figure. The smell of sweat and anger seemed to permeate the air around him. "Daddy, I just wanted to—" Isadora's voice was an almost inaudible whisper, but it was interrupted by the large hand that rose threateningly. "You wanted nothing. You're just like your mother, a useless good-for-nothing who only gets in the way." The words spewed from his mouth like venom, each syllable loaded with a hatred that the girl couldn't understand. In the corner of the barn, a large iron cauldron used to prepare animal feed was boiling over a lit fire. Steam rose, forming dense clouds that mingled with the stifling afternoon heat. Frank looked at that giant pot, and something terrible flashed in his eyes. "You want to play with paint? Then I'll show you what happens to kids who don't know how to behave." He grabbed Isadora's thin arm so hard that it left red marks on her delicate skin. The girl screamed in pain and fear, trying to break free, but the forces were unequal. Frank dragged her through the barn toward the steaming cauldron, his mind consumed by a blind rage that erased any trace of humanity or fatherly love. "No, Daddy, please." Tears streamed down Isadora's frightened face as she struggled in vain. The heat of the fire could already be felt on her skin, and the sound of the boiling water seemed to echo like a hungry monster. It was in this moment of absolute despair that a miracle happened. From the field near the barn, a medium-sized white horse appeared like a vision. The animal, which had been grazing peacefully moments before, had heard the screams and galloped. There, driven by an instinct that even he himself didn't fully understand, the horse didn't hesitate. With surprising force, he charged at Frank, knocking him away from Isadora. The man fell heavily to the cement floor, hitting his head and becoming stunned for a few precious seconds. Isadora took advantage of that moment to run. Her little legs carried her out of the barn, toward the sunflower fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. The rag doll was left behind, forgotten on the floor next to the paint-stained documents. The horse followed her discreetly, keeping enough distance not to scare her further, but close enough to protect her if necessary. His intelligent eyes watched every movement of the child, and something in his animal heart recognized in her a soul that needed to be guarded. When Frank recovered and realized he was alone in the barn, a cruel smile formed on his lips. Maybe it was for the best. Maybe the problem had solved itself. He didn't go after his daughter. Meanwhile, Isadora ran among the tall sunflowers, her tears mixing with sweat and dust. Her hands still hurt where her father had squeezed them, and light burns marked her little fingers where she had accidentally touched the hot edge of the cauldron during the struggle. The afternoon waned slowly over Harmony Creek, painting the sky with orange hues that were reflected in the golden fields. Isadora finally stopped running, exhausted and lost, in the middle of the endless plantation. The silence around her was broken only by the gentle wind that swayed the giant flowers. It was then that she saw the white horse approaching slowly, his hooves producing a soft sound on the dry earth. The animal's eyes were gentle, completely different from the furious look she had seen in her father. For the first time on that terrible day, Isadora felt that perhaps she wasn't completely alone in the world. Isadora's first night alone in the fields was a nightmare that seemed to have no end. The temperature dropped drastically after sunset, and the 4-year-old girl curled up between the thick stalks of the sunflowers, trembling violently. Her light clothing offered no protection against the biting cold that descended from the distant hills. The white horse remained close by, but respecting the distance that the child's fear demanded. During the coldest hours of the dawn, the animal strategically lay down near the place where Isadora had hidden, his large body radiating heat that reached her like a silent blessing. The girl, even scared, managed to sleep for a few minutes between sobs and shivers. When the sun rose, bringing with it the scorching heat typical of rural Oklahoma, new torments began. Isadora woke up with her throat as dry as sandpaper, her lips cracked, and a desperate thirst that made her head throb. She hadn't drunk water since the day before, and the relentless sun was sucking every drop of moisture from her fragile little body. The horse, as if perfectly understanding the situation, began to move slowly through the plantation. His deliberate and paused steps seemed like a silent invitation. Isadora, moved more by despair than by trust, decided to follow him from afar. Her wobbly legs could barely carry her, and several times she stumbled on the exposed roots of the sunflowers. After almost an hour of painful walking, the horse stopped next to a small pond hidden among the plants. The water wasn't crystal clear, but it was clean enough to quench her thirst. Isadora threw herself face down on the muddy bank and drank, desperately, not caring about the taste of earth that permeated the precious liquid. Meanwhile, on the main farm, Frank began his macabre charade. He phoned some neighbors with a voice choked with false concern, telling them that Isadora had run away from home after a minor domestic accident. His version was carefully crafted. The girl had been frightened after spilling paint on the documents and had run away for fear of being scolded. "You know how kids are," he told the neighbors who came to offer help. "Isadora has always been very sensitive. She must be hiding somewhere, afraid to come home." His words sounded convincing to those who didn't know the truth behind that facade. The searches organized by Frank were a cruel farce. He directed the volunteers to distant areas, far from the sunflower fields where he knew his daughter was lost. Secretly, he hoped she would never be found. The problem would have solved itself, without his hands getting obviously dirty. During the second day, Isadora began to show worrying signs. Her body temperature rose and fell violently, alternating between chills and hot flashes. Hunger had become a constant pain in her stomach, and she began to eat small wild berries that she found along the way, some of which left her with terrible cramps. The horse demonstrated surprising intelligence. When he saw Isadora approaching plants that could be dangerous, the animal placed himself between her and the vegetation, preventing her from becoming intoxicated. During the sudden storms that fell in the afternoon, the horse guided her under leafy trees or rocks that offered protection from the torrential rain. On the third day, Isadora developed a high fever that left her delirious. She talked to herself, calling for her mother, whom she had lost 2 years before, and sometimes confusing the horse with figures from her feverish dreams. The animal stayed by her side constantly now, abandoning any pretense of respectful distance. It was during one of these episodes of delirium that something extraordinary happened. Isadora, in her mental confusion, reached out her little hand and touched the horse's soft muzzle. The animal didn't move away. On the contrary, he lowered his large head and let her lean on his neck. It was the first real physical contact between the two, a silent milestone in their unlikely relationship. The burns on Isadora's hands, caused by contact with the cauldron on the day of the incident, began to become infected. The lack of medical care and constant exposure to dirt caused the wounds to become red and inflamed. The constant pain made her cry for hours, small sobs that broke the heart of anyone who could hear them. The horse began to lick the girl's wounds gently during the moments when she managed to calm down. His saliva had natural properties that helped to clean the infections, an instinctive knowledge that the animal carried without knowing how to explain. These moments of mutual care created an increasingly deeper bond between the two survivors. On the farm, Frank's false searches began to arouse suspicion in some more observant people. Dale Carver, a farmhand known for his honesty and good heart, noticed that the search teams were never directed to the fields closest to the property. This seemed strange to him, since it would be natural to look first in the immediate surroundings. Betty, Dale's wife, was also uneasy. She had seen Isadora a few times playing alone in the barn and had always worried about the distant way. Frank treated his own daughter. The version presented by the farmer didn't match the behavior of the girl she knew, a child too shy to run away from home for such a simple reason. During the fourth night, a particularly violent storm hit the region. Lightning cut through the dark sky, and the wind howled among the sunflowers with destructive force. Isadora, already weakened by hunger and illness, couldn't stop shivering. Her clothes were soaked and freezing, clinging to her skin like a second layer of ice. The horse made a desperate decision. He gently took the collar of Isadora's dress between his teeth and carried her to a more protected place, a small abandoned barn on Dale's neighboring property. It was a huge risk, as it meant approaching human habitations, but the animal knew that the girl wouldn't survive another night. In the open, the barn offered protection from the rain and wind, but it was full of moldy hay and spider webs. Isadora huddled in a corner, finally managing to stop shivering, while the horse stood guard at the entrance. The storm raged outside, but for the first time in days, the girl felt relatively safe. It was in this moment of apparent tranquility that Dale's footsteps approached the barn. The man had gone out to check if his animals were protected from the storm, when he noticed a strange light coming from the abandoned barn. His lantern flickered in the darkness as he approached cautiously, without imagining that he was about to make a discovery that would change everything. Dale's lantern first illuminated the frightened eyes of the white horse, who positioned himself defensively at the entrance of the barn. The animal showed no aggression, but his posture made it clear that he would protect something precious. Inside, when the light finally reached the corner where Isadora was huddled, Dale felt his heart leap into his throat. "My God!" The words came out as a horrified whisper. The girl was unrecognizable. Her brown hair was tangled and dirty with earth, her dress torn in several places, and her pale skin showed clear signs of malnutrition and dehydration. But what shocked Dale the most were the infected wounds on her small hands, which shone red. Under the light of the lantern, Isadora couldn't speak when she saw the man approaching. Her whole body began to tremble violently, not just from the cold, but from a deep terror that had settled in her soul. She cowered even more against the wall of the barn, trying to become invisible. "Easy there, little one. I'm not going to hurt you," Dale said, in the softest voice he could muster. He had raised injured wild animals before and knew that sudden movements could further scare the traumatized child. "My name is Dale. You're safe now." The horse watched every movement of the man with extreme attention. When Dale slowly extended his hand towards Isadora, the animal tensed, ready to intervene if necessary. But something in the farmhand's gentle posture must have reassured the horse, because he allowed the approach. Isadora looked alternately at Dale and the horse, as if seeking approval from the animal to trust the human being. When the horse slightly relaxed his defensive posture, she allowed Dale to kneel beside her, still maintaining a respectful distance. "You're the little girl everyone is looking for, aren't you?" Dale asked gently. Isadora, upon hearing her name, the girl's eyes filled with tears, but she still couldn't utter a word. The trauma had stolen her voice, leaving only a silence charged with pain and fear. Dale took off his dry shirt and carefully wrapped it around Isadora's trembling shoulders. The warm fabric was like a comforting hug she hadn't received in days. For the first time since it all started, she felt that maybe she could trust someone besides the horse. "Betty!" Dale shouted towards the house, his voice cutting through the sound of the rain. "Betty, come here, quick!" In a few minutes, Betty appeared, running with a raincoat and another lantern. When she saw the scene in the barn, her hands flew to her mouth to stifle a cry of compassion. Her eyes, the eyes of a woman who had always dreamed of being a mother, immediately recognized the signs of a severely neglected child. Sweet Jesus, what have they done to this child? Betty knelt on the other side of Isadora, her experienced seamstress's hands quickly assessing the state of the torn clothes and exposed wounds. "Dale, she has a high fever. She needs urgent medical attention." Isadora looked at Betty with a mixture of hope and terror. The woman had a kind face marked by years of hard work, but softened by a genuine gentleness. Her graying hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and her brown eyes radiated a maternal compassion that the girl hadn't seen in a long time. "Can we take her home?" Betty asked her husband. But her voice made it clear that it wasn't really a question. It was a decision already made by her heart. "Of course," Dale replied without hesitation. "But let's take it slow. She's very scared." The horse approached when he realized that the humans intended to take Isadora away. The animal positioned himself beside the girl, lowering his head so she could touch his muzzle. It was as if he were saying goodbye, or perhaps giving his approval for her to go with those people. Isadora surprised everyone by getting up unsteadily and walking to the horse. She wrapped her thin arms around the animal's neck and whispered something so low that only he could hear. They were the first words she had spoken since the trauma, and they were directed at her silent guardian. "Can he come with us?" Betty asked, noticing the special connection between the child and the animal. "It seems like they're friends." Dale nodded, understanding instinctively that separating the two would be cruel. "Our pasture has space, and by the looks of it, this horse saved her life." The walk to the couple's house was slow and careful. Isadora could only walk a few feet before her legs completely gave out. Dale carried her in his arms with all the care in the world, while Betty walked ahead, lighting the way. The horse followed them docilely, as if he knew he was part of a rescue mission. Dale and Betty's house was simple but welcoming. White-painted brick walls, wooden windows faded blue by time, and a small garden where Betty grew medicinal herbs and spices. The smell of a home, inhabited by good people, was something Isadora had forgotten existed. Betty immediately prepared a warm bath for the girl, adding chamomile and other soothing herbs to the water. It was during this bath that she made the discovery. That left her sleepless for the next few days. The burns on Isadora's hands weren't the result of a casual accident. The marks were too deep, too organized, clearly caused by forced contact with something extremely hot. "Dale!" Betty called her husband out of the bathroom, her voice trembling with contained indignation. "These wounds, they weren't caused by an accident. Someone hurt this child on purpose." The revelation hit Dale like a punch in the gut. He had suspected that something was wrong with Frank's story, but he never imagined that it could be something so terrible. His fists clenched, involuntarily, and he had to take a deep breath to control the anger that grew in his chest. "We have to notify the authorities," Dale said, but Betty shook her head. "First, we need to take care of her. Do you see how she trembles when adults approach too quickly? This girl has been tortured, Dale. She needs to feel safe before anything else." They decided that Betty would care for the injuries, while Dale would provide a suitable place for the horse. The animal had strategically positioned himself under the window of the room where Isadora was being treated, like a silent sentinel who didn't intend to abandon his post. During the first medical care, Isadora remained completely silent. She allowed Betty to clean and bandage her wounds, but her eyes remained glazed, as if she were present only in body. Her mind seemed to have retreated to a safe place, away from pain and fear. The first night in the couple's house was marked by terrible nightmares. Isadora would wake up screaming, calling for the horse and begging Daddy not to hurt her anymore. Betty would run to comfort her, but the girl would only calm down when she saw the horse through the window, a white and protective silhouette against the darkness. Meanwhile, on the main farm, Frank continued his charade of concerned father. But some neighbors began to ask more direct questions about the domestic accident that had caused the girl's escape. Frank's stories presented small inconsistencies that attentive people like Dale began to notice. On the second day of recovery, Dr. Ed Barnes, the local veterinarian, appeared on Dale's property to check some animals. When he saw the white horse grazing near the house, he was intrigued. The animal was clearly of good lineage, well cared for despite the recent life in the open, and there was something in his eyes that demonstrated an intelligence out of the ordinary. "Where did this horse come from?" Dr. Barnes asked, while examining the animal. "I don't remember seeing him in the area before." "He was taking care of the girl we found lost," Dale explained, watching how the veterinarian would react to the information. Dr. Barnes frowned as he examined the horse's neck more closely. There was an old mark there, almost imperceptible under the white hair, but his trained eyes immediately identified it. It was a branding iron scar, a practice that had been banned in the T region for years for being considered too cruel. The discovery of the mark on the horse's neck left Dr. Barnes deeply disturbed. He had seen similar marks only once before, on animals that came from West Texas, where some breeders still used archaic and cruel methods to identify their cattle. But that specific mark awakened a vague memory that he couldn't completely locate. "Dale, I need to tell you something," the veterinarian said, moving away from the horse with a worried expression. "This mark, it reminds me of something I saw a few years ago. I can't remember exactly what, but I have the feeling that I've encountered this animal before." While the two men talked in a low voice, Isadora watched through the bedroom window. Her eyes followed every movement of the horse, as if he were her only anchor in a world that had become terrifying and unpredictable. The girl still hadn't spoken a word since arriving at Dale and Betty's house, but her drawings told a devastating story. Betty had given Isadora paper and crayons, hoping that art could help the child express herself. What she saw in the drawings made her cry in silence, distorted figures of a large man throwing a small doll towards a black cauldron, red strokes that represented fire and pain, and always, in all the drawings, a white horse appeared as a savior figure. "She's trying to tell us what happened," Betty murmured to her husband when he entered the house. Dale, her drawings, They show someone trying to hurt her in a terrible way. It wasn't a simple accident. Dale examined the drawings with growing horror. His experience as a farmhand gave him enough knowledge to interpret the symbols that the girl had used. The cauldron, the fire, the threatening figure. Everything pointed to deliberate and planned violence. "Betty, I think I know who did this to her," Dale said, with a voice full of contained anger. "And if I'm right, this horse may be the key to proving everything." That same afternoon, Frank appeared on Dale's property. His arrival was announced by the nervous neigh of the horse, who immediately assumed a defensive posture as soon as he smelled the man approaching. The animal positioned himself strategically between the house and Frank, his ears back and his muscles tense. "Good afternoon, Dale," Frank said with a forced smile, but his eyes scanned the property looking for signs of his daughter. "I heard. You found a lost girl. Could it be my Isadora?" Dale immediately noticed how the horse reacted to Frank's presence. The animal began to paw the ground and shake his head violently, clear signs of extreme agitation. Inside the house, Isadora also reacted. Betty found her hiding under the bed, trembling uncontrollably and whispering, "No, no, no," repeatedly. "Yes, we found a girl," Dale replied cautiously, watching every reaction of Frank. "She was in terrible condition, with severe wounds on her hands and signs of abuse." Frank's mask of paternal concern almost slipped for a moment. His eyes narrowed, imperceptibly before he regained his composure. "Wounds on her hands? Oh, yes. She burned herself when she spilled that paint. It was a silly accident, but you know how kids get scared." "Accident?" Dale repeated, his voice full of skepticism. "These wounds look more like burns from forced contact, and the girl has other signs of violence." Frank took a step towards the house, but the horse immediately moved to block his path. The animal didn't show open aggression, but made it clear that he wouldn't allow the man to get any closer. "What a strange horse," Frank commented, and for the first time his voice betrayed a genuine nervousness. "Where did he come from?" "He was taking care of the girl when we found her," Dale replied, watching Frank's reaction closely. "It's almost like he knew her from before." Frank's face paled slightly, but he quickly tried to disguise it. "Well, I'd like to see my daughter. Now, I'm sure she misses her daddy." From inside the house came a muffled scream of terror. Isadora had heard Frank's voice and went into complete panic. Betty found her struggling violently, trying to hide in any dark corner she could find. "I think you better leave," Dale said, firmly. "The girl clearly doesn't want to see you, and until she's better, I won't allow anyone to disturb her anymore." Fury flashed in Frank's eyes for a moment before he managed to control it. "She's my daughter, Dale. I have legal rights over her. And I have a moral duty to protect a hurt child," Dale retorted, crossing his arms. "If you really care about her, you'll wait until she's ready." After Frank's departure, the house was tense for hours. Isadora couldn't calm down completely until the sound of the car faded completely. Even so, she remained vigilant, running to the window at every strange noise to check if the horse was still there. Dr. Barnes returned the next day with disturbing information. He had spent the night researching in his old files and finally found the reference he was looking for. The mark on the horse's neck was identical to one he had documented 3 years earlier in a case of animal cruelty that was never fully clarified. "Dale, this horse belonged to a woman named Fernanda Mendon," Dr. Barnes revealed. "She was married to Frank and had sought me out several times to treat strange injuries on the animal. Always said he hurt himself, but the wounds had suspicious patterns." The revelation hit Dale like a lightning bolt. Fernanda Mendon was Frank's first wife, Isadora's mother, who had abandoned the family 2 years earlier. But now a new, terrible possibility began to form in his mind. "What happened to Fernanda?" Dale asked, although he feared the answer. "She disappeared suddenly," Dr. Barnes explained. Frank said she had run off with another man, abandoning her daughter, but I always found it strange that she left the horse behind. She loved that animal more than anything. Betty, who had overheard the conversation, felt a chill run down her spine. Dale, what if Fernanda didn't abandon the family? What if something terrible happened to her? That night, Isadora surprised everyone by speaking for the first time since arriving at the couple's house. She was looking out the window, watching the horse under the moonlight, when she whispered words that chilled the blood of her caregivers. "Mommy fell from high up," she said in a small, broken voice. "Daddy pushed Mommy. She screamed very loud, then was very quiet on the ground." Betty ran to hug the girl, her heart breaking upon hearing that devastating confession. "Isadora, honey, can you tell us more about what happened to your mommy?" But the girl had already retreated again into her protective silence, as if revealing only small fragments of truth when she felt safe enough. It remained for the adults to piece together a macabre puzzle that was beginning to reveal a reality much more sinister than anyone had imagined. Meanwhile, Frank received a phone call at his farm. On the other end of the line, a raspy voice confirmed that he had found information about Isadora's whereabouts and was ready to solve the problem upon proper payment. The network of violence that Frank had woven around his family was about to expand, threatening not only Isadora, but all those who dared to protect her. The horse, as if sensing the danger approaching, spent the entire night on vigil, his senses alert for any threat that might arise from the darkness. His mission to protect the girl was far from over, and he was prepared to face any danger that was necessary to keep Isadora safe. 2 days after Frank's phone call, strange men began circulating in the region. They were two rough-looking characters from neighboring towns, asking questions about a missing girl and offering generous rewards for information. Their methods were subtle but persistent, visiting bars, grocery stores, and hangouts where farmhands usually gathered. Dale learned of their presence through a friend who worked at the gas station at the edge of town. "There are two strange guys asking about a kid and a white horse," the man had warned. "They say they're family, but something doesn't add up. They ask too many questions and offer too much money for a simple search." The news made Dale's blood run cold. He immediately understood that Frank had escalated the situation to a dangerous level. From that moment on, Betty and he decided to keep Isadora hidden in the basement during the day, a small but safe space that they had adapted with mattresses and toys to make it less scary. Isadora accepted the need to hide with a disturbing maturity for a 4-year-old child. She had already learned that the world was full of dangers and that adults could be deadly threats. The horse, noticing the change in routine, positioned himself strategically in the pasture so that he could observe all entrances to the property. During the long hours in the basement, Isadora began to talk more with Betty. They were painful, fragments of memories that she released like small pieces of cutting glass. "Mommy cried a lot at night," she said one morning, hugging a rag doll that Betty had made to replace the one that had been lost on Frank's farm. "Daddy yelled, and then Mommy cried." Betty felt her heart breaking with each revelation. The girl described a home where violence was routine, where fear was a constant presence, and where a white horse was the only refuge of peace amidst the chaos. "Snowy always protected me," Isadora murmured, referring to the horse by the name she had created for him. "When Daddy got angry, I ran to Snowy." One particularly hot and stuffy July afternoon, one of the men hired by Frank appeared on Dale's property. He was a tall, skinny guy with scars on his face and eyes that didn't show any compassion. He said his name was Ronnie and claimed to be a distant cousin of Frank, concerned about his niece's whereabouts. "I heard you found a girl," Ronnie said, but his eyes scanned the property in a calculating way, as if he were mapping possible hiding places. "My cousin is desperate to find his daughter." Dale kept his expression neutral, but inside he was on high alert. "Yes, we found a child, but she's under medical care and cannot receive visitors at the moment." "Medical care?" Ronnie feigned concern. "What happened to her? Frank said it was just a domestic accident." "The wounds are more serious than he admitted," Dale replied, carefully. "The girl needs peace and quiet to recover." Throughout the conversation, the horse had remained nearby, watching Ronnie with intense attention. When the man made a sudden move to approach the house, the animal immediately placed himself between him and the door, assuming a posture that left no doubt about his protective intentions. "Nervous horse," Ronnie commented, but there was a tension in his voice that suggested recognition. "Where did he come from?" "He was taking care of the girl when we found her," Dale repeated the version that had become standard. "They seem to have a special connection." Ronnie remained on the property for a few more minutes, asking seemingly casual questions, but clearly trying to obtain specific information about the family's routine and the times when Isadora might be most vulnerable. When he finally left, Dale immediately went down to the basement to check if the girl was okay. Isadora was curled up in a corner, trembling violently. She had heard the stranger's voice through the floorboards, and something in that voice had awakened terrible memories. "He was there," she whispered to Betty. "He was there when Mommy fell." The revelation was like a punch in the gut. Ronnie wasn't just a man hired by Frank. He had been a witness, and possibly an accomplice, to what had happened to Fernanda. The situation was much more dangerous than anyone had imagined. That same night, Dr. Barnes arrived at the property with devastating information. He had spent days researching in the municipal archives and discovered glaring inconsistencies in the official version of Fernanda Mendon's disappearance. "Dale, I found something disturbing," the veterinarian said, his voice trembling with indignation. Fernanda's death certificate was signed by a doctor who wasn't even in town on the day of the supposed death, and there is no record of an ambulance or removal of the body to the location indicated in the document. Betty felt her legs give way. "Are you saying that—" "I'm saying that Fernanda didn't die in any accident, and that Frank forged the documents to cover up what really happened," Dr. Barnes completed. "Even worse, I discovered that he wasn't legally married to her. Fernanda's real husband died 3 years before, in circumstances that also seem suspicious." The truth began to reveal itself in all its horrible magnitude. Frank wasn't just a violent father. He was a murderer who had systematically eliminated all obstacles to seize Fernanda's family's lands and assets. And Isadora was the only living witness to his crimes. "There's more," Dr. Barnes continued. "Fernanda had sought me out a few weeks before disappearing. She was planning to run away with Isadora and the horse. She had discovered documents proving that Frank had falsified the death of the girl's real father to marry her and take over the properties. The final information was devastating. Frank wasn't Isadora's biological father, but rather her uncle, who had murdered his own brother to steal his inheritance and then eliminated Fernanda when she discovered the truth. While the adults processed these terrible revelations, Isadora had silently climbed up from the basement and approached the window where she could see the horse. The animal seemed to sense her presence and approached, allowing her to touch his muzzle through the bars. "Snowy saw everything," she whispered to the horse, her words loaded with a painful wisdom. "Snowy knows the truth about Daddy." It was at that moment that the second male figure hired by Frank appeared in the shadows of the backyard. Younger and more agile than Ronnie, he had managed to approach the house without being detected. His eyes met Isadora's in the window, and a cruel smile formed on his lips. The horse was the first to notice the danger. With a warning neigh that cut through the night, he positioned himself defensively between the house and the intruder. But this time, the man was prepared to deal with the protective animal, bringing with him tools that could neutralize even the most determined of guardians. Inside the house, Dale heard the horse's warning sound and immediately understood that danger had reached them. He ran to grab his hunting rifle while shouting for Betty to protect Isadora. The battle to protect the girl and preserve the truth about Frank's crimes was about to begin, and everyone knew that only one side would come out alive from this confrontation. The confrontation that followed was brief but decisive. The horse, even facing a man armed with ropes and tranquilizers, fought with the ferocity of one who protected his family. Dale arrived in the backyard in time to see the animal knock down the intruder, who fled limping and cursing into the darkness. The message was clear. Frank wouldn't give up easily, and other attacks would come. It was Betty who made the decision that would change everything. "We can't wait any longer," she said with iron determination while hugging Isadora, who was trembling after witnessing yet another scene of violence. "This child needs to tell her story to the whole town. It's the only way to protect her." Dr. Barnes had brought with him a small golden key that he had found among Fernanda's veterinary belongings, left in his office before she disappeared. "Fernanda told me that if anything happened to her, I should give this to her daughter when she grew up," he explained. "But I think the time has come." The key opened a small safe hidden in the room that had been Isadora's in the old house. Inside it, letters written by the girl's own mother revealed the whole truth: how Frank had murdered Fernanda's husband to steal his lands, how he had forced her to marry to legitimize possession of the assets, and how he planned to eliminate both her and Isadora as soon as he consolidated his control over the inheritance. More importantly, there was a secret will leaving everything to Isadora, completely invalidating the forged documents that Frank had used to seize the family fortune. The girl wasn't just a victim. She was the rightful heir to one of the largest rural properties in the region. The final revelation happened when Isadora, strengthened by the love and protection she received from her new caregivers, found the courage to speak publicly. During a meeting at the town church, convened by Dr. Barnes and other concerned citizens, the girl went up to the pulpit with the horse by her side. "My name is Isadora," she said in a small but firm voice, echoing through the packed church, "and I want to tell you what the bad man did to my family." The silence in the church was absolute. Hundreds of people listened in shock as a 4-year-old child described, with the brutal innocence of truth, how she had seen Frank push her mother from the top of the barn, how he had tried to throw her into the boiling cauldron, and how the white horse had been her only protection during years of terror. "He's not my real daddy," Isadora revealed, stroking the horse's muzzle to calm down. "He killed my real daddy, and then he killed my mommy. Snowy saw everything and always protected me." The commotion was immediate. Neighbors who had always suspected Frank's behavior stood up to share their own experiences. Farmhands told about intimidation and threats. Others revealed inconsistencies that they had noticed in the official version of the deaths in the family. Frank, who had arrived at the church hoping to recover his daughter before the community, saw his world collapse in a matter of minutes. He tried to deny the accusations, claimed that the girl was confused, but the documentary evidence that Dr. Barnes presented was irrefutable. The biggest twist came when the horse himself, as if understanding that the moment of final truth had arrived, guided some people to a specific location in the old backyard of Frank's property. There, buried under an old tree that the animal always visited during the wee hours, were found the remains of both Isadora's real father and her mother, Fernanda. The horse had been the silent guardian not only of Isadora, but of the memory of her entire murdered family. For years, he had kept vigil over the places where his loved ones were buried, developing the protective instinct that saved the girl's life. Confronted with irrefutable evidence and Isadora's courageous testimony, Frank attempted one last, desperate escape. But the very men he had hired to eliminate the evidence of his crimes turned against him, when they realized that they wouldn't receive payment from a man in free fall. The justice that fell upon Frank was swift and merciless. He lost not only his freedom, but all the assets he had stolen through murders and forged documents. The properties returned to their rightful owner, a 4-year-old girl who had survived hell thanks to the unconditional love of a white horse. Dale and Betty, who had fallen deeply in love with the brave girl, formalized her adoption. They discovered that, as the rightful heir, Isadora possessed more than enough resources to secure her future. But what really mattered was the genuine love they had built together. The horse, recognized as a hero by the entire community, went on to live his final days in the green fields of the recovered farm. Isadora, who grew up strong and happy under the loving care of her new parents, visited him every day, telling him about her adventures at school and her dreams for the future. 6 months after that transformative meeting in the church, Isadora celebrated her 5th birthday, surrounded by love and security. She had recovered her voice, her smile, and her trust in the world. The scars on her hands were still there, but now they were just marks of a battle won, not symbols of defeat. During the birthday party, held in the same sunflower field where she had been lost at the beginning of her journey, Isadora approached the horse and whispered in his ear, "Thank you for never abandoning me, Snowy. You saved my life." The horse lowered his majestic head and gently touched the girl's face in a final gesture of affection that summarized years of silent protection and unconditional love. His mission was complete. The child he had sworn to protect was safe, surrounded by love and in control of her own destiny. Frank, serving his sentence in a distant prison, had lost everything: his freedom, his stolen fortune, his reputation, and even the possibility of disturbing the family he had tried to destroy. The greed and cruelty that moved him for so many years turned against him in a definitive way, proving that justice, even when it takes time, always finds its way. The story of Isadora and the White Horse became a legend in Harmony Creek, told and retold as an example of how true love and courage can triumph over the deepest evil. And every night, when the sun set over the golden fields, a happy girl and a protective horse shared moments of absolute peace, knowing that they had found in the love of a true family the happy ending they had always deserved. The cycle of pain had come to an end, inaugurating a new era of hope, justice, and love that would extend through all future generations of the family, finally reunited and protected forever.